This is the second session of a great and powerful story. In the first session, a cruel king punished a poor servant girl named Amara for a tiny mistake. He threw her into the deadly lion cage, home of the most dangerous beast in the kingdom. But instead of tearing her apart, the lion stood before her like a shield. Why? Because every night, Amara had secretly fed him a small piece of meat, and the starving lion became her loyal friend. When the king saw this unexpected loyalty, his pride shattered. His anger exploded like fire. And now, he wants to kill both Amara and the lion who dared to defy him.
The courtyard had never heard a silence as heavy as the one that followed the moment Chemo stepped between Amara and the killing blow. For a heartbeat, even the wind seemed to stop moving, as if the heavens themselves were trying to understand what had just happened. A lion, one of the king's most feared beasts, the same monster used to execute traitors, had bowed his head before a servant girl. And not just any servant girl, but the one the king had publicly humiliated only moments ago. The king's jaw clenched so tightly that the veins along his neck pulsed like ropes. His crown, tilted slightly from his sudden jerk of disbelief, glinted beneath the sunlight as though mocking him. Around him, nobles gasped, mothers covered their children's eyes, and the palace guards exchanged nervous, silent glances. Amara, trembling from both terror and relief, felt her knees weaken as Chemo pressed closer to her, his breath hot against her shoulder. She had fed him scraps of meat every night for months, never expecting anything in return. Yet now, in the center of the king's arena, with thousands watching, the lion she had pitted was shielding her with a ferocity that felt almost divine. The king's humiliation grew painfully visible, his pride pierced before the entire kingdom. And in that single, fragile moment, the fate of everyone in the courtyard changed forever. Then chaos erupted like a wildfire. The king's voice cut through the murmurs, loud enough to shake the stones beneath their feet. "Kill them both," he roared. "Now!" His command cracked through the air like a whip, and within seconds, guards surged toward the lion den with swords raised and shields trembling. Some hesitated, not out of disloyalty, but out of raw, primal fear. Chemo was no ordinary beast. He was massive, battle-scarred, and starving from the king's ruthless punishments. And now, he was furious. The moment the first guard stepped into the shadowed entrance of the den, the lion launched forward with a speed that blurred his shape into a golden streak. His claws slashed across the guard's shield, shattering it in half as though it were made of soft wood. Screams erupted instantly. More guards charged in, but they were swallowed by darkness, followed by the unmistakable sound of ripping flesh, clashing metal, and bones cracking like twigs. The stone walls, once decorated with the king's proud banners, were painted red within seconds. Blood splattered across the torches, the floor, even the lower steps of the royal platform. The crowd pushed backward in terror, some tripping, others dropping their children as they fled toward the gates. Panic spread like smoke. The more they tried escaping, the more bodies collided, forming a storm of fear that no one could control. King Oba Atakunal, blinded by his wounded ego and boiling rage, shoved two guards aside and charged toward the den himself. His robe snagged on a broken spear, but he ripped it away without slowing down, his face twisted into something unrecognizable, half fury, half madness. When he reached the mouth of the den, Chemo emerged again, his mane dripping crimson. The lion growled, low and thunderous, a sound that made even the bravest warriors step back. The king froze for a second, his breath hitching, though he would never admit fear. He raised his sword, pointing it at the beast. "Move," he hissed. "I am your king." But Chemo did not bow, did not flinch, did not blink. Instead, he roared, a roar so powerful, so ancient, that the very earth seemed to tremble. Birds scattered from the palace tower. Dust fell from the carvings along the archways. Even the horses tied outside the courtyard reared in panic. Amara watched it all from near the den's rear wall, her hands trembling uncontrollably. She had never seen Chemo like this, not even on nights when he fought other lions over a meager chunk of meat. The beast she once fed with gentle fingers was now an unstoppable storm made of muscle, fury, and loyalty. His eyes, dark and burning, flicked toward her just long enough to assure her he had not forgotten who he was protecting. She felt tears sting her eyes, not from fear but from the unbearable weight of realizing that a creature she saved with scraps was now risking his life for her. The king, enraged by the animal's defiance, snapped his fingers at the archers stationed atop the stone walls. "Shoot," he commanded. "Shoot until nothing is left alive." The archers hesitated, many of them shaking, unable to decide whether Chemo or the king frightened them more. But obedience had been beaten into them for years, and so, slowly, bows lifted. The sky darkened for a moment beneath the shadow of 100 arrows. They flew downward in a deadly rain, slicing through the air with a sound that resembled tearing cloth. Some arrows struck the lions, wounding them, enraging them further. Others hit the guards who were still fighting inside the den, piercing armor and flesh alike. A few even ricocheted off stones and embedded themselves in the wooden gates behind the fleeing crowd. The palace, once a symbol of order and decorum, transformed into a battlefield within minutes. The air filled with screams, the metallic scent of blood, and the sharp twang of bowstrings being pulled again and again. Guards slipped in puddles of spilled blood. Nobles fainted. Servants hid behind pillars, praying silently for mercy. The king's rage had unleashed a violence that no one, absolutely no one, could control anymore. And in the center of it all stood Amara, small and trembling, yet surrounded by lions who refused to let her fall. She pressed her back against the den wall, watching every second, every strike, every roar. She had never wanted war, never wanted rebellion, never wanted to challenge the king. She had simply tried to survive. But survival, she now understood, had a price. And the palace was paying it in blood. Amara pressed herself tighter against the cold stone of the den wall, her heart hammering so violently it felt as though it might shatter her ribcage. Every second stretched into eternity, each one marked by the guttural roars of Chemo and the shrill screams of the king's soldiers. She could see the chaos unfold around her in sickening detail, a soldier tripping over a fallen comrade, a bow snapping under the strain of a wounded archer, an arrow slicing through the silk of a noble's sleeve before burying itself into the stone behind him. Chemo was everywhere at once, a golden blur of teeth, claws, and rage, cutting through the men like a living whirlwind. The other lions, awakened and emboldened by their companion's fury, joined the fray with feral precision. It was no longer just a fight, it had become a brutal ballet of survival, instinct, and vengeance. Blood pooled along the courtyard floor, mixing with dust and sweat, the scent so overpowering it made Amara's stomach heave. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady herself, reminding herself that she had done nothing wrong, yet everything around her screamed otherwise. From the corner of her eye, she saw the king stumble as Chemo's massive paw struck the ground near his feet. The force sent a tremor up through his boots, rocking him off balance. But Oba Atakumal was not a man who could admit defeat. He roared, a sound that was more beast than human, and swung his sword in wide, frenzied arcs. Every movement carried the weight of his fury, each swing attempting to crush the lion, the soldiers, and perhaps even the walls of the palace itself. Yet, for every man he struck down, 10 more took his place, and Chemo was relentless. The great lion lunged again, colliding with the king's armor with a thunderous impact that reverberated through the courtyard. Metal buckled, dust erupted from the ground, and the king was momentarily thrown back. But his eyes, red with rage, wild and unyielding, fixed on Amara as if the chaos itself was a mere backdrop to his singular desire for revenge. Fear clawed at her chest, but she couldn't look away. She had seen the edge of true madness before, and now it was upon her. Meanwhile, the other guards who had initially hesitated found themselves caught in a nightmare of violence. Soldiers screamed, some lunging blindly at the lions with daggers while others tried desperately to retreat. Yet there was no safe place, not in this battlefield turned courtyard. Chemo moved with surgical precision, his instincts honed by months of being fed, cared for, and now enraged beyond reason. Each strike was deliberate, each attack ensured that no innocent bystander was harmed, except, of course, those who had drawn a sword against the girl who had saved him. Amara's chest tightened as she watched the carnage, her mind struggling to process the sight of loyal soldiers falling at the paws of creatures they had once called pets. It was chaotic, brutal, unstoppable, and beautiful in a terrifying, sacred way. The animals had become more than beasts, they had become protectors, guardians, and judges all at once. She knew, deep in her soul, that the balance of power in the kingdom was shifting before her very eyes. And then, a piercing scream cut through the air, louder and more desperate than any before it. One of the king's lieutenants had attempted to strike Chemo from behind, thinking the lions focused solely on the king or the girl. But Chemo's reflexes were impossible, honed by months of trust and daily care. In an instant, the lion twisted, striking down the would-be attacker with a force that sent him crashing into the stone wall. The crowd gasped, frozen in disbelief at the speed, precision, and power of what they had just witnessed. Amara's own breath caught, her hands pressed over her mouth as tears pricked her eyes. It was not merely survival anymore, it was a declaration. Chemo, and every lion following his lead, was declaring that they would not allow injustice to continue unpunished. Every growl, every snap of a jaw, every swipe of a claw carried the weight of 100 wrongs endured and 100 more yet to come. Amara felt a strange mix of awe and horror. She knew that her small acts of kindness had unleashed something far greater than herself, far greater than the king's authority, and perhaps far beyond the comprehension of any mortal in the palace. As the battle raged on, the king's composure began to crumble. His roars became erratic, his sword swings less precise, and his commands were lost in the cacophony of chaos around him. For the first time, Oba Atakunal's pride failed him. He realized that his palace, his soldiers, even his weapons could not contain what he had tried to control. The ground shook with the movements of the lions, bodies of men and beasts alike littered the courtyard, and the air grew thick with the metallic stench of blood. Amara stumbled slightly, but Chemo nudged her gently with his massive head, reminding her that she was not alone. In that fleeting moment, a fragile sense of hope bloomed in her chest. Perhaps, just perhaps, this was more than mere survival. Perhaps it was the beginning of justice, raw and untamed, carved by teeth and claw in defiance of tyranny. She looked up at the king, seeing the fury in his eyes give way to panic, a fleeting glimpse of fear that he would never publicly admit. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her blood, that this battle had only just begun, but that in this moment, the balance had shifted irreversibly, and there was no turning back. The courtyard was a scene of utter chaos, a battlefield that had once been the king's symbol of control and opulence now transformed into a theater of raw, unbridled fury. Chemo prowled through the scattered soldiers, each step deliberate, each movement a declaration of loyalty and protection. Amara stood frozen, still clutching the stone wall, her clothes smeared with dust and sweat, her eyes wide as they followed every strike. Around her, the palace guards were no longer a disciplined unit. They were scattered, desperate, and terrified, some fleeing for their lives while others attempted futile strikes against the lions. The sound of clashing steel, roars, screams, and the sickening thud of bodies hitting stone filled the air, thick and suffocating. Amara could hardly breathe, yet she knew that she could not look away. The scene unfolding before her was as mesmerizing as it was horrifying. Chemo's eyes, golden and unwavering, met hers for a fleeting moment, a silent reassurance that he would not let her be harmed, that he would not allow the injustice of this day to stand. King Oba Atakunal, once towering and seemingly invincible, staggered back from a forceful strike that sent his jeweled crown tumbling across the courtyard floor. His hands trembled as he picked it up, his once commanding presence reduced to raw, jagged anger. Each breath he drew was ragged, and his gaze darted frantically between Amara and the lions that had become the architects of his humiliation. He swung his sword again, but the motion lacked precision, an uncharacteristic faltering that did not escape the keen eyes of those around him. Chemo lunged at him with a controlled fury, forcing the king to stumble back repeatedly. The other lions, emboldened by Chemo's dominance, began to encircle the king, their growls a low, terrifying symphony that echoed through the marble halls. For the first time, Oba Atakumal tasted fear, a sharp, metallic tang that coated his tongue and made his heart pound in a rhythm he had never known. The guards who remained were paralyzed by the sight of their sovereign being overpowered by beasts they had once believed were no more than tools. It was a dramatic reversal, a moment in which the kingdom itself seemed to tilt on its axis. Amara's heart raced, but amidst the terror, a clarity emerged. She could no longer be just a passive observer. The events of the day had placed a weight upon her shoulders, a responsibility she could not ignore. Her small acts of kindness had brought Chemo's loyalty, but it was her courage now that might shape the outcome. Taking a careful step forward, she raised her voice above the din, calling out to the remaining soldiers. "Leave him! Leave the king alone," she shouted, her tone trembling but firm. Some of the men hesitated, caught between the commands of their sovereign and the terrifying reality that the lions would not be stopped. One by one, they began to drop their weapons, stepping back in awe and fear. Amara's presence, though small and human, became a beacon of authority amidst the madness, a fragile yet undeniable force capable of influencing the tide of the battle. Chemo paused, recognizing the subtle command in her voice, and the lions slowed their advance, circling the king but sparing those who had chosen surrender over blind loyalty. Oba Atakumal, realizing that even his soldiers were abandoning him, roared in a desperate mix of rage and fear. His vision blurred with fury as he swung wildly, striking walls, stone pillars, and even the air itself, hoping to find some target to vent his frustration upon. Blood streaked his brow, and his once pristine garments were shredded, soaked with dust and sweat. He stumbled repeatedly as Chemo and the other lions pressed their advantage, a force of nature that no sword, no command, and no crown could control. Amara watched him, her mind racing with conflicting emotions. Fear still lingered, but so did a strange sense of empowerment. The tyrant who had ruled through cruelty, who had condemned her to death for a minor mistake, was now facing the consequences of his arrogance and cruelty. The power of kindness, loyalty, and courage, manifested in the form of a golden lion, was something that no royal edict could ever suppress. The realization hit her like a thunderbolt. This was not merely a fight for survival, but a reckoning that the kingdom had been waiting for, whether the people understood it or not. As the dust settled and the last of the king's frantic strikes faltered, a strange silence fell over the courtyard. The lions, panting heavily, their fur matted with dust and streaked with blood, stood around Oba Atakumal, who slumped against a marble pillar, broken in ways beyond the physical. Amara stepped forward cautiously, her eyes meeting Chemo's once more, drawing strength from his unwavering loyalty. The king, his voice a rasp of disbelief and fury, glared at her. You dare," he sputtered, but no one moved to back him up. His authority had crumbled in the face of raw, undeniable truth. Amara's voice was steady now, firm and clear. "You underestimated loyalty. You underestimated kindness. And now, you face the consequences." Her words hung in the air, a declaration that transcended fear, violence, and cruelty. The soldiers watched, silent and uncertain, the palace walls echoing with the aftermath of a battle that would be spoken of for generations. Chemo's growl softened as Amara reached out to touch his golden mane, the bond between human and beast solidified not just by survival, but by mutual trust, courage, and respect. The tyrant king had been humbled, and in that moment, a fragile sense of justice, raw, real, and powerful, settled over the courtyard like a delicate, yet unshakable, weight. The courtyard, once a magnificent testament to the king's wealth and power, had been utterly transformed. Dust swirled around shattered marble pillars, broken banners flapped limply in the wind, and pools of blood, both human and beast, stained the once pristine stone. The air was thick with the iron scent of battle, mingled with the faint metallic tang of royal ornaments crushed beneath the weight of chaos. Amara stood amidst it all, her heart pounding but her spirit steady, as she surveyed the aftermath. Chemo sat beside her, his golden mane flecked with dust and blood, eyes scanning the horizon for any lingering threat. The soldiers, humbled and terrified, had fallen silent. Some wept quietly, others stared blankly at the ruin around them. The people of the palace, servants, maids, and attendants who had witnessed the king's humiliation, now regarded Amara with a mix of awe and fear. She was no longer merely a servant girl, she had become a symbol of courage, of loyalty rewarded, and of a justice that the throne had never delivered. Yet, amidst the victory, a deep awareness settled in her chest. Survival did not erase the scars, nor did it undo the terror she had endured. Every scream, every clash of steel, every moment of bloodshed had changed her irrevocably, and she knew the journey ahead would demand even greater courage. King Oba Atakunal, humiliated and battered, slumped against the remnants of a marble column, his regal bearing shattered like the palace around him. His jeweled crown lay discarded, cracked and dusty, a symbol of his lost authority. Though alive, he was broken, physically, emotionally, and politically. His guards, those who had survived the massacre, no longer bowed or obeyed him without question. The loyalty he had once commanded through fear had evaporated like mist in the morning sun. His once mighty voice, capable of silencing the entire courtyard with a single command, was now a rasp of desperation and disbelief. "This cannot be," he muttered, staring at Amara and the lions with a mix of fear and fury that seemed almost pitiable. Yet, even in his defeat, there remained a flicker of danger. A man like Oba Atakunal did not simply disappear. He could scheme, manipulate, or lash out with unpredictable violence. Amara, aware of this, kept a vigilant eye on him, recognizing that true victory would require more than brute force. It would demand wisdom, strategy, and unwavering resolve. Her mind raced through possibilities, weighing the risks and the alliances that might secure not only her safety but the future of those who had suffered under the king's tyranny. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the bloodied courtyard, Amara stepped forward, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "The violence ends here," she declared, her tone calm yet commanding, carrying a weight that made even the most hardened soldiers pause. Chemo rumbled softly beside her, a low, vibrating affirmation that resonated through the shattered stones. The king, beaten and humiliated, looked up at her with a mixture of disbelief and reluctant acknowledgement. The palace had witnessed a shift in power so profound that even walls could sense it. Fear had given way to respect, and cruelty had been met with courage. Amara's journey from a frightened, punished servant to a figure of authority was far from complete, yet in that moment, she realized something vital. True strength was not measured by crowns or swords, but by the courage to face injustice and the heart to protect those who could not defend themselves. As she moved among the survivors, tending to the wounded, comforting the terrified, and ensuring that order began to replace chaos, a quiet determination settled over her. The session had reached its violent climax, yet the story of Amara, her bravery, her bond with Chemo, and the lessons of justice and loyalty was only beginning to unfold. The courtyard had finally quieted, though the echoes of violence lingered like a stubborn fog. Amara moved slowly among the remnants of chaos, her steps measured, her eyes scanning each corner for survivors or stragglers, her heart heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. The air, thick with dust and the lingering iron scent of blood, felt almost unreal, as if the palace itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next moment of upheaval. Servants emerged cautiously from hiding, their faces pale but filled with awe. They approached Amara with a hesitant reverence, offering whispered thanks and small gestures of loyalty. Chemo, ever watchful, prowled beside her, his golden mane glinting in the dim sunlight that filtered through the broken archways. He was more than a companion, he was a protector, a living testament to the bond between bravery and compassion. Amara knelt beside those who were injured, her hands trembling slightly as she tended to cuts and bruises, yet her determination never faltered. She understood the weight of responsibility now, not as a servant girl who could be discarded at whim, but as a force capable of shaping the course of lives. a beacon of hope in a palace that had long been ruled by fear. King Oba Adekunle remained slumped against the shattered remnants of his throne, his expression a mixture of disbelief, anger, and a growing awareness of his vulnerability. His once commanding presence had crumbled under the relentless loyalty between Amara and Kimo, and he now faced the terrifying reality that his subjects, his soldiers, and even the people he ruled no longer feared him in the same way. His eyes, clouded with fury and humiliation, followed every move of Amara as she walked through the courtyard, her voice calm and authoritative as she gave instructions to restore order. He realized, with a bitter pang, that his cruelty had not only failed to subdue her but had actually amplified her strength in the eyes of everyone around him. Even the palace guards, those who had survived the onslaught, now hesitated to obey his commands blindly, their loyalty shaken by the display of courage they had witnessed. Oba Adekunle's mind raced through possibilities for revenge, yet deep down, he recognized that any attempt would now be met with resistance far beyond his control. His power, once absolute, had been fractured, and he felt an unfamiliar sensation, fear, not just of Amara, but of the consequences of his own reckless tyranny. In that moment, the king understood that the palace had shifted permanently, that the balance of power had changed in ways he could no longer manipulate or dictate. As night fell, casting long shadows across the palace ruins, a quiet sense of resolution began to settle over the courtyard. The chaos of the day had left scars, but it had also opened the door to a new order, one that valued courage, loyalty, and justice above fear and cruelty. Amara, her face illuminated by the fading light, stood tall, her gaze steady and unwavering. She had emerged not only victorious but transformed, a symbol of strength and compassion, someone who had faced the darkest depths of cruelty and returned unbroken. Kimo, faithful and fierce, remained close at her side, a living reminder of the power of trust and loyalty between beings. The survivors gathered around her, listening intently as she spoke words of reassurance and guidance, promising to protect them, to ensure that no one would be punished for mistakes or cruelty again. And though the palace bore the scars of blood and fire, it now echoed with a new rhythm, one of hope, resilience, and a dawning understanding that true leadership could arise not from fear, but from courage and integrity. As Amara looked toward the horizon, she knew that this victory was but the beginning of a longer journey, a journey that would test her, shape her, and ultimately define the legacy she was destined to leave behind. In the stillness that followed, the palace seemed to breathe again, a silent acknowledgement that a new chapter had begun, and that the story of bravery, loyalty, and justice would continue, carried forward by the girl who once faced a lion's cage and emerged a hero.